The air in the sterile, glass-walled office felt as thin and artificial as the motivational posters plastering the walls. You know the ones. Teamwork makes the dream work. Synergy. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. They were less inspirational pronouncements and more the desperate prayers of a company trying to convince itself it wasn't actively drowning in a sea of its own jargon. And in the eye of this corporate hurricane, standing as a solitary island of reason, was me, Mason. My title? AI ethicist. My mission? To ensure that the dazzling, ever-expanding power of artificial intelligence wasn't unleashed into the world like a rabid dog. My tools? Logic, empathy, and an almost pathological obsession with documentation. I built AI governance platforms. Think of them as the digital seatbelts and airbags for the AI revolution. They were intricate, sometimes complex, certainly not flashy, but they were essential. They were the quiet guardians of responsible innovation, the unsung heroes preventing the digital train wreck. And then there was Elaine. Elaine, my boss. Elaine, who spoke in bullet points and PowerPoint transitions. Elaine, whose understanding of AI ethics seemed to be limited to the soundbite of the week she'd skimmed from a Forbes article. She had a laugh that sounded like a startled hyena and a conviction that any process more involved than ordering coffee was overcomplicating things. For Elaine, ethical AI was a speed bump on the highway to profit, a bureaucratic nuisance to be bulldozed. Our company, let's call it OmniCorp, was a titan of industry, a sprawling behemoth that prided itself on its forward-thinking approach. They were knee-deep in AI, integrating it into everything from customer service bots that mimicked empathy to predictive analytics that nudged consumer behavior. And that's where I came in, the canary in the digital coal mine, chirping warnings about bias, transparency, and algorithmic accountability. My days were a delicate dance. I'd present meticulously researched reports detailing how a particular algorithm might disproportionately affect minority groups, or how a decision-making AI lacked the necessary audit trails for accountability. I'd map out governance frameworks, proposing safeguards, ethical review boards, and transparent data handling protocols. I'd explain, with diagrams and case studies, why a move fast and break things approach to AI was less about innovation and more about inviting disaster. Elaine, however, would just nod along, her eyes glazing over like a cheap donut. Mason, Mason, Mason! She'd sigh, leaning back in her ergonomic chair, a picture of exasperated authority. This is all very thorough, but we have deadlines, we have market pressures. We need to deploy, not deliberate ourselves into paralysis. This AI governance stuff is just, it's bogging us down. It's overcomplicating things. Overcomplicating? I'd counter my voice tight with a frustration I'd learned to keep carefully leashed. Elaine, we're talking about systems that can influence loan applications, hiring decisions, even medical diagnoses. If we overcomplicate it now, we risk a catastrophic failure later. A failure that could cost us billions, not to mention public trust. She'd wave a dismissive hand, her rings catching the fluorescent light. Billions is a long way off, Mason. Right now, we need to get these AI modules rolled out. HR is already getting pressure. They want to see action, not more paperwork. Just simplify, make it manageable, less analytical. Less analytical? That was the corporate equivalent of telling a brain surgeon to just wing it. I felt like a lone voice of reason in a room full of shouting barbarians, trying to explain the concept of fire safety to a pyromaniac. And the worst part? They actually listened to Elaine. Her buzzwords, her superficial confidence, her ability to distill complex issues into easily digestible and utterly misleading sound bites, it all held more sway than my years of research and careful planning. The tension simmered for months. Every ethical debate was met with Elaine's signature sigh and the mantra of overcomplicating processes. She'd often bring in external consultants, slick young men and women with impossibly perfect hair and vocabulary that consisted of about 90% acronyms, who'd nod enthusiastically at Elaine's pronouncements and then charge the company a small fortune for generic advice that amounted to, be nice. Then came the day of the great AI Ethics Summit, a company-wide event orchestrated by Elaine to streamline our AI deployment strategy. It was a parade of half-baked ideas and carefully curated success stories, with me relegated to a 5-minute slot titled Ethical Considerations, a Brief Overview. My overview, of course, was packed with data, with projections of future liabilities, with warnings about systemic bias lurking in the datasets. I presented my findings on the new Customer Sentiment Analysis AI, a tool designed to gauge client satisfaction, but which, my analysis showed, was heavily skewed against non-native English speakers. I showed how its negative sentiment scores were consistently higher for certain demographic groups, leading to a potential cascade of unfair customer treatment. I proposed a simple fix: recalibrate the weighting, introduce a bias detection layer, and implement a human review process for borderline cases. Elaine, seated at the head table, checked her phone. When I finished, she didn't even wait for the polite applause to die down. "Thank you, Mason," she said, her voice dripping with mock sincerity. That was very informative, and again, very detailed. But as we've discussed, we need to be agile. We can't let these edge cases paralyze our progress. The sentiment analysis tool is performing within acceptable parameters, and frankly, the data suggests that most customers are happy. We'll revisit your edge cases down the line, perhaps in phase 2 once we've captured sufficient market share. She then turned to the slick consultant who'd been flown in for the occasion. "Now, Mark, tell us about your innovative approach to AI integration that will have us dominating the market by Q3. And just like that, my meticulously researched warnings, my years of dedication, were dismissed like a stray piece of lint. The air in the room grew heavy. The smiles of my colleagues felt forced. I saw a few familiar faces in the crowd, people who'd privately thanked me for raising these issues, now looking down, unable to meet my gaze. It was the familiar sting of being on the right side of truth, but the wrong side of power. Later that day, the summons came. A curt email from HR. "Please report to conference room B at 3 p.m. for a brief meeting with Elaine Reyes and HR representative Mr. Capper." Henderson. No context, just the sterile pronouncement of a corporate death sentence. I walked into conference room B with the practiced calm of someone who'd mentally prepared for this moment more times than they'd had hot dinners. Elaine was there, looking remarkably unperturbed, a faint smirk playing on her lips. Beside her sat Mr. Henderson, a man whose face was as blank and unexpressive as a fresh sheet of paper, clutching a manila folder like a shield. "Mason, thanks for coming," Elaine began, her tone chipper, as if she were about to announce an unexpected bonus. "We've been doing a lot of strategic realignment lately, as you know. Evaluating our teams, our processes, ensuring everyone is aligned with OmniCorp's core objectives." I just nodded, my gaze fixed on the folder in Mr. Henderson's hands. It felt heavier than it looked, pregnant with the weight of my impending dismissal. "And unfortunately," she continued, her voice softening into that practiced, insincere empathy, "your role and your approach, while valuable in certain contexts, aren't quite aligning with our current direction. We feel your focus on granular ethical frameworks, while commendable, is, and please don't take this personally, overcomplicating our agile deployment strategy." Overcomplicating. There it was. The golden bullet, fired with such casual precision. It was the corporate equivalent of being fired for breathing too loudly. Mr. Henderson slid the folder across the polished table. It landed with a soft thud. "This contains your severance package, Mason. 30 days notice, continued health benefits for 60 days, and outplacement services. Please review it and we'll need your company laptop, badge, and any other company property returned by the end of the day." I looked at the folder, then at Elaine, then back at Mr. Henderson's impassive face. My mind, usually a buzzing hive of ethical considerations and risk assessments, went strangely quiet. It was like the storm I'd been weathering had finally broken, leaving behind an eerie calm. I saw my entire tenure at OmniCorp flash before my eyes, the late nights debugging ethical loops, the thankless hours spent explaining AI's potential for harm, the countless times I'd felt like the sole adult in a room full of impulsive children. All of it reduced to overcomplicating. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I didn't make a scene. That wasn't my style. My style was documentation. My style was process. And my style, it turned out, was about to become their undoing. I reached for the folder, my fingers brushing against the cool, smooth surface. "Understood," I said, my voice steady, unnervingly so. "And you're sure you want all company property returned?" Elaine gave a little nod, a triumphant flick of her hair. "Yes, Mason, all of it. We need to tie up loose ends." I pulled out my laptop, the familiar weight of it grounding me, then my ID badge, the one with my face looking younger, more hopeful, before the corporate grind had etched its subtle toll. Finally, from my worn messenger bag, I produced something that made Elaine tilt her head in mild curiosity, a small, tattered, spiral-bound notebook. "This," I said, holding it up, "is my personal documentation log. It contains detailed records of all AI deployments, ethical review outcomes, and any potential risks I flagged. It's comprehensive, and it's very, very thorough." A flicker of something, unease, perhaps, crossed Elaine's face. Mr. Henderson just blinked. It's mine, I continued, my voice taking on a subtle edge that hadn't been there before. I compiled it over the years for my own reference, to ensure I was doing my job correctly, to ensure we were doing our jobs correctly. I'll be keeping it. Elaine waved a hand, though this time it lacked its usual conviction. Of course, Mason. Whatever you need for your personal records. She clearly saw it as a collection of my overcomplicated thoughts, a sentimental keepsake. She had no idea she was looking at the master key to their entire ethical, or rather unethical, infrastructure. I stood, the folder tucked under my arm, the notebook clutched in my hand. Thank you for your time, I said, offering a polite nod that felt more like a salute. I'll have the laptop and badge returned by 5. As I walked out of conference room B, the sterile office air felt a little less suffocating. The motivational posters seemed to mock me with their platitudes. But as I stepped out into the harsh afternoon sunlight, a strange sense of calm settled over me. They thought they were firing an employee. They thought they were trimming the fat. They had no idea they had just handed the keys to the kingdom, complete with an instruction manual and a detailed expose to the person who understood its most dangerous secrets better than anyone. I didn't drive straight home. I drove to a quiet park, found a bench under a large oak tree, and opened my messenger bag. I pulled out the notebook. The cover was worn, some pages dog-eared. Inside, it was filled with my precise, almost microscopic handwriting, cross-referenced with dates, project codes, and names. It wasn't just notes. It was a meticulously detailed chronicle of every ethical compromise, every bypassed protocol, every instance where the pursuit of profit had trampled on the principles of responsibility. OmniCorp had its agile deployment strategy. They had their buzzwords and their glossy presentations. But I had something far more valuable: the unvarnished truth, documented with the same rigor they so carelessly dismissed. And as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I began to read. Not with anger, not with sadness, but with the cold, quiet resolve of a strategist preparing for the final move. They had fired me for overcomplicating things. Soon, they would understand just how simple and devastating a truly complicated truth could be. The game had just begun. The dismissal was swift, clinical, and utterly devoid of surprise. Elaine and Mr. Henderson had performed their roles with practiced efficiency, reducing my years of dedication to a few sterile sentences about strategic realignment. But as I walked out of conference room B, clutching my personal logbook and the discarded company laptop, a different kind of process was already underway in my mind. They saw it as a termination. I saw it as an inventory check. They believed they were cutting dead weight. I knew I was pruning the rot from the roots. My apartment, usually a sanctuary of ordered calm, became my command center. The sterile office air was replaced by the comforting scent of old paper and the hum of my personal server. For 2 days, I didn't leave. I didn't rage. I didn't despair. I worked. I meticulously sorted through the digital remnants of my time at OmniCorp. Every email, every flagged document, every deleted draft that had been restored from the digital graveyard, I cataloged them all. It wasn't just about gathering evidence. It was about reconstructing the narrative they'd so carefully erased. My personal logbook, that tattered, spiral-bound companion, was the Rosetta Stone. It was a detailed, chronological account of every ethical breach, every warning ignored, every project that was pushed forward, despite clear data indicating potential harm. I cross-referenced it with saved emails from Elaine, HR memos, and even Slack messages that had been accidentally deleted but painstakingly recovered. I found the emails where Elaine dismissed my concerns about the sentiment analysis, AI's bias against non-native speakers, framing them as minor edge cases. I found the internal memos greenlighting the predictive analytics project, knowing full well it had a documented predisposition to unfairly target low-income communities. I even unearthed the contractual loopholes that OmniCorp's legal team had exploited to bypass their own stated ethical review processes. They had paper trails. I had an entire library. And then there were the system logs. My access might have been revoked, but the systems themselves, the very AI frameworks I'd helped build, remembered. I had backdoors, of course, not for malicious intent, but for forensic audit. Remote access, secured through encrypted channels I'd set up years ago for disaster recovery testing. I initiated a silent data pull, not to interfere, not to sabotage, but to gather proof of the ongoing transgressions. I watched, in real time, as the biased sentiment AI continued to misclassify customer feedback, as the predictive analytics engine flagged individuals based on an algorithm with a known discriminatory outcome, It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck from a safe distance. With each click of the keyboard, a new piece of evidence added to my arsenal. Days bled into a week. The initial shock of dismissal had long since faded, replaced by a cold, steely resolve. I wasn't just building a case, I was building a bomb. And the fuse was already smoldering. The first tremors began subtly, like a distant earthquake barely felt on the surface. My old colleagues, those who hadn't been entirely swept up in Elaine's sycophantic praise, started reaching out. Tentative texts. Hey Mason, weird question, but did you ever finish that diagnostic tool for the customer service bots? Or is the new compliance module supposed to be crashing every other hour? Then came a more panicked message from Sarah, a junior developer I'd mentored. Mason, are you seeing this? The AI ethics dashboard just went offline. No explanation. And the audit logs for the loan application AI are empty, completely blank. HR is scrambling. The loan application AI, that was one of my personal white whales. I'd spent months fighting for more robust audit trails, for human oversight in high-stakes decisions. Elaine had dismissed it as overcomplicating. Now, the audit logs were gone. Not just missing, but gone. A digital black hole where accountability should have been. OmniCorp was starting to feel my absence. Not as a missing employee, but as a missing safeguard. The systems I had meticulously documented, the ethical guardrails I had fought to implement, were either failing or, worse, had been deliberately compromised. The panic within OmniCorp was palpable, even from the outside. I saw it in the fragmented conversations on encrypted forums where former and current employees, bound by shared frustration, exchanged whispers. I heard it in the hushed tones of a former colleague I ran into at a coffee shop who looked ashen when she recounted a frantic all-hands meeting where Elaine, her voice strained, blamed external network anomalies for the system failures. External anomalies. The irony was almost too delicious. Elaine was clearly in damage control mode, attempting to spin a narrative of external sabotage. But the problems were too systemic, too numerous, and too closely aligned with the very issues I had flagged. The sentiment analysis, AI was still misinterpreting slang, leading to unfair customer escalations. The predictive analytics were generating suspiciously biased outcome reports. And now, the complete disappearance of audit logs for the loan application. AI was a gaping wound in their regulatory compliance. The whispers grew louder. Clients were starting to notice. A major financial institution, a cornerstone client for OmniCorp's AI lending platform, had reportedly sent a strongly worded inquiry about the lack of transparency in their system's decision-making process. Deadlines were being missed, project timelines, already ambitious, were slipping into the abyss. Elaine's agile approach was beginning to resemble a runaway train with no brakes. The public scrutiny was beginning. A few early articles, more speculative than damning, started appearing on tech blogs. OmniCorp AI systems face glitches amidst ethical concerns. Data integrity questioned in OmniCorp AI deployments. It was a slow burn, but the fire was starting to catch. And then I made my move. It wasn't a dramatic reveal, no public pronouncements, no viral tweets from a sock puppet account. It was far more precise, far more devastating. I had gathered enough evidence to not only prove OmniCorp's negligence, but to demonstrate intent. The emails showing Elaine's deliberate dismissal of ethical concerns, the internal documents that authorized the deployment of biased algorithms, the system logs confirming ongoing violations, it was a damning dossier. I compiled a concise, factual report. No embellishment, no emotional language, just the unvarnished truth, meticulously documented and cross-referenced. I highlighted the specific instances where ethical warnings were ignored, where protocols were bypassed, and where regulatory compliance was actively undermined. I included system logs, timestamps, and names. Then, I identified the perfect recipient. Not the media, not the public, not yet. I chose a specific regulatory body, one that had recently been vocal about AI governance and held significant power to investigate and penalize corporate malfeasance. I drafted a formal inquiry, framed as a concerned stakeholder, seeking clarification on OmniCorp's AI deployment practices, particularly concerning bias, transparency, and audit trails. I attached my meticulously compiled dossier. I didn't send it from my personal email. That would be too traceable. Instead, I used a secure, encrypted email service, creating a burner account that was untraceable. And for the recipients, I didn't just select the regulatory body. I CC'd Elaine Reyes, and for good measure, the head of OmniCorp's legal department. The email was polite, almost subservient in its tone. It asked pointed questions about specific AI systems and their compliance with established ethical frameworks. It cited public reports of system instability and potential bias. It was a Trojan horse, carrying a payload of their own documented failures directly into the heart of their legal and compliance departments, and, more importantly, to the attention of external regulators. The effect was instantaneous, though the full impact would take time to unfold. The email landed in their inboxes like a digital landmine. Elaine would see it, her blood pressure would spike, and she'd immediately recognize the source of the information, even if the sender was anonymous. The legal department would recognize the gravity of the questions and the attached evidence. The regulatory body would now have a formal complaint backed by internal documentation demanding an investigation. The company's internal systems, the very ones I had helped build, were about to become their undoing. They had rushed headlong into deploying AI without proper oversight, driven by profit and Elaine's short-sighted ambition. They had ignored the guardrails, dismissed the warnings, and actively suppressed evidence of their own ethical failures. Now, those same systems, with the truth unearthed and presented by me, were about to come back to haunt them. They had thought they were cutting loose a liability. Instead, they had just handed the key to their entire operational structure to an outsider who knew every lock, every hidden passage, and every hidden weakness. The silence that followed my email was the stillness before the storm, and OmniCorp, blinded by hubris, was about to be swept away by a hurricane of their own making. The silence from OmniCorp was deafening, but it wasn't the silence of an adversary conceding defeat. It was the tense, anticipatory silence of a cornered animal, its options dwindling. My anonymous inquiry, coupled with the mounting internal system failures and client complaints, had clearly thrown them into a tailspin. The whispers from my old colleagues intensified, painting a picture of escalating chaos within the company. Elaine was reportedly living on caffeine and panic, holding emergency meetings that devolved into shouting matches. The legal department was in overdrive, poring over contracts and scrambling to understand the scope of the damage. Then the call came. It wasn't a formal summons, no polite HR invitation this time. It was a direct line, the CEO's private number, appearing on my burner phone screen. Nathan Altman, the man who, as CEO, had ultimately rubber-stamped Elaine's decisions, always too detached to notice the ethical cracks forming beneath his feet. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a strained, desperate rasp, a stark contrast to the confident CEO persona he projected in public. "Mason, is that really you?" he began, his voice laced with disbelief and a thinly veiled plea. "Look, we need to talk. This whole situation, it's spiraling. We've got regulators breathing down our necks, clients threatening to walk, and frankly, the board is breathing down my neck." He paused, and I could practically hear him swallowing his pride. "We made a mistake, a big one. Elaine, she wasn't entirely honest with us about the extent of your concerns, and our processes, they've clearly failed us." He was doing a masterful job of deflecting blame, painting himself as an innocent victim of circumstance and Elaine's poor judgment. But I knew better. Nathan Altman had cultivated this environment. He had prioritized growth over governance, innovation over integrity. He had built an empire on a foundation of ethical shortcuts, and now that foundation was crumbling. I let him ramble for a few more minutes, the sound of his frantic apologies and desperate rationalizations, a bitter symphony. When he finally ran out of breath, I spoke, my voice calm and measured, a stark counterpoint to his panic. "Mr. Altman," I began, "the formality, a deliberate choice. I understand you have concerns." "Concerns? Mason, we're talking about the potential collapse of the company. We're facing massive fines, regulatory probes that could cripple our operations, and our reputation is in tatters. We need your help. We need you to explain this, to help us fix it." This was it. The moment of truth, the culmination of years of meticulous work, of being overlooked and undervalued. I had two options, and only two. Option A, the narrow escape hatch, the corporate equivalent of a clean slate, with terms dictated by me. Option B, the nuclear option, the scorched earth resolution that would leave OmniCorp in ruins. I took a slow sip of the lukewarm coffee I'd made earlier. "Mr. Altman," I said, my voice steady, "you fired me for overcomplicating processes. You dismissed my ethical frameworks as a hindrance to your agile deployment strategy. You chose profit over prudence. And now you're facing the consequences of those choices." I leaned forward, my voice dropping slightly, a subtle shift in tone that conveyed the gravity of what was to come. "I have compiled a comprehensive dossier. It details every instance where OmniCorp deliberately bypassed ethical guidelines, deployed biased AI, and ignored warnings of systemic risks. This dossier has been submitted to the relevant regulatory bodies, accompanied by a formal inquiry demanding an immediate investigation. Nathan's breath hitched. You submitted it to the regulators? Yes, I confirmed. And it's not just about the past. The systems are still operational, Mr. Altman. The biased sentiment analysis AI continues to unfairly penalize customers. The loan application AI's audit logs are still empty, making accountability impossible. The predictive analytics engine continues to generate discriminatory outcomes. These aren't just past mistakes, they are ongoing violations. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. I can assure you, the regulatory bodies are taking this very seriously. They've initiated preliminary investigations, and their response has been swift. Now came the options. I presented them with the dispassionate clarity of a doctor delivering a grim prognosis. Option A. I began, my voice cool and even. OmniCorp agrees to immediate, substantial, structural, and ethical reforms. This includes the establishment of an independent AI ethics board, reporting directly to the board of directors, which I will chair. Elaine Reyes will resign, effective immediately, with no severance package and no clawback protection. You, Mr. Altman, will issue a public statement acknowledging OmniCorp's past shortcomings and committing to a new era of ethical AI governance, with me leading that charge. Furthermore, my previous salary will be doubled, and I will be granted full autonomy over all AI development and deployment processes. This is the path of minimal disruption, the path to regaining trust, albeit with significant remediation. Nathan sputtered, You expect us to promote you and fire Elaine and accept public censure? I expect you to understand the severity of your situation, I replied calmly. These are the terms for a narrow escape, a chance to salvage what remains of your company. The alternative? I let the silence hang in the air, heavy with unspoken threats. Is option B, I continued, my voice dropping to a near whisper, the full weight of the regulatory investigation is unleashed. The media will have a field day with the internal documentation. Clients will flee in droves. The company will face catastrophic fines, potential legal action from affected individuals, and likely forced restructuring or even dissolution. Your reputation, Mr. Altman, and the reputation of OmniCorp will be irrevocably destroyed. This is the path of total capitulation, where the consequences are measured not in financial penalties, but in the utter obliteration of your corporate legacy. Nathan was silent for a long moment, the only sound, his ragged breathing. I could picture him in his plush office, his face contorted with indecision, the weight of his empire crushing him. Finally, he spoke, his voice hoarse, defeated. We have to go with option A, Mason. There's no other choice. And so, the endgame began. The ensuing days were a whirlwind of controlled demolition and careful reconstruction. Elaine's resignation was a quiet affair, a swift exit from the corporate stage, her dreams of unchallenged power dissolving into ignominy. Her departure was not accompanied by a press release, but by a hushed understanding that she had been escorted from the premises, her access terminated. The public statement was crafted, carefully worded, acknowledging recent challenges in our AI governance framework and the company's commitment to strengthening our ethical oversight under new leadership. My promotion to head of the newly formed AI ethics board was, to say the least, a surprise to the wider OmniCorp workforce, but few dared to question it, given the palpable unease and the sudden, almost apologetic tone of management. The regulatory probes were significantly softened, my cooperation and the company's immediate willingness to implement robust ethical frameworks diffusing the initial fury. The media reported on OmniCorp's renewed commitment to responsible AI, a narrative subtly shaped by carefully placed leaks and the sheer relief that the company wasn't heading for complete collapse. Clients, seeing the tangible changes and the public commitment, began to tentatively reaffirm their partnerships. My salary doubled, as promised. But the true compensation was the autonomy. I was no longer the lone voice in the wilderness. I had the authority, the resources, and the board's grudging support to implement the ethical standards I had always advocated for. The AI governance platform I had envisioned was finally being built, not as a speed bump, but as the bedrock of OmniCorp's future. The true satisfaction, however, came not just from the institutional shift, but from the quiet, almost poetic justice. Nathan Altman, once a symbol of unchecked corporate ambition, was now a prisoner of his own making, forever tethered to the ethical foundation he had once so carelessly dismissed. He was still CEO, but his power was now tempered, his decisions scrutinized by me and my newly established board. He had traded his illusion of control for the privilege of survival. As for Elaine, her name faded into the annals of corporate cautionary tales. The employee who had been so eager to cut dead weight had become the very dead weight that had threatened to drag the entire company down. Her legacy at OmniCorp was not one of success, but of a stark, unforgettable lesson in the cost of ethical compromise. My own journey was just beginning. I had been fired for overcomplicating things, for demanding diligence. Now, diligence was my mandate, and complexity was my strength. I had taken the empire they built on shaky ethical ground and, with the meticulous precision of a strategist, dismantled it from within, only to rebuild it on a foundation of integrity. Watching OmniCorp navigate this new, ethically conscious landscape, I felt a profound sense of closure. It wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. It was about ensuring that the power of AI was wielded responsibly, not as a tool for unchecked profit, but as a force for genuine progress. If watching corporate arrogance face a quiet, meticulously documented reckoning resonates with you, consider liking and subscribing. It fuels these stories and ensures that the voices of competence and conscience aren't silenced. For the brilliant minds who build the future, remember this: integrity isn't a bug, it's the operating system. And when that system is compromised, the entire program crashes.